All right, joining us live right here in New York City is Ben Shapiro, editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire and host of the Ben Shapiro Show. It's a podcast wildly successful. You're in town because you were just roasted by Commentary Magazine, right?
Yeah, it was a blast. It was a lot of fun. I'm used to receiving a lot of hate, so receiving it in person is a nice thing.
Was there one? Yeah. Was there one particular line that stood out, either
that made you mad
from somebody who was roasting you or you as a roastee?
Well, Dana Perino kept calling me short, and I found that particularly insulting because Dana's a tiny human. And
right.
There's that.
She was stressing about how to roast because she usually doesn't have that abrasive part of her personality.
I was shocked by the cruelty of Dana Perino.
Did you? And you roasted back, didn't you?
Yeah, Jasper came in for a couple of hits.
And that's, of course, her dog.
All right. Meanwhile, from Commentary Magazine to the New York Times, what do you make of the New York Times being caught not only in having to apologize for an inappropriate tweet, but then an editorial note fixed on this news analysis that said, essentially, yeah, you know what? We left out the fact that the woman involved in this story does not remember this story.
Yeah, I would say that it's unbelievable, except it's insanely believable. Every time the New York Times makes a mistake, it is always in the direction of somebody on the right getting clocked, and that's particularly true in the Kavanaugh story. I mean, there was a much bigger story in that book that was not reported by the New York Times, namely that Leland Kaiser, who is the best friend of Christine Blasey Ford, said she didn't believe Ford's story and was pressured by Ford's allies to change her story. And the New York Times didn't see fit to report that. They buried this particular story in their news analysis section, so they didn't have to run it through the news section. And then they actually removed the line that said that the alleged victim didn't remember the incident in question and then replaced it later. I mean, that's not just bad journalism. That's not botchery. I mean, that's purposeful at that point.
So let's see them try to explain themselves out of this. Let's see the two writers of the book talked about what they wrote for the opinion section of the newspaper and then how it was edited out. See if you buy this.
There was no desire to withhold important information from our readers. We have all of it in the book. During the editing process, there was an oversight and this key detail about the fact that the woman herself has told friends she doesn't remember it and has not wanted to talk about it, got cut. And it was an oversight. We're a team at the New York Times. We have processes in place.
I think actually the way it happened was the editors being concerned about naming her. In that sentence that had her name, it also had that she doesn't remember it. We also took out the fact that she didn't remember it.
Is there even a victim? I mean, she doesn't remember it.
No, I mean, there is no story here, right? And then this prompted editorials from the New York Times and the Washington Post talking about how the FBI was engaged in a sham investigation based on them not investigating an allegation that has no alleged victim. I mean, it's insanity.
Right, but
do you buy that explanation?
No, of course I don't buy the explanation. That's not an oversight. How do you how is it an oversight when you don't just remove the name, you remove the key detail of the entire story? It's not a detail. That is the center of the story.
But the center of the story was from a man who used to be an attorney for Bill Clinton.
During the impeachment, yeah.
And he would not speak to the authors of the book either, and only spoke through two other people who were officials who we don't know who they are.
You mean the nonpartisan attorney? Because that's what they wrote, the nonpartisan attorney.
That's right.
A nonprofit or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. The whole thing is absurd. They ignored the real story. But that is the New York Times Timesing.
Right. And what about every presidential candidate that immediately called for Kavanaugh to be impeached on a story that had no substance?
You mean Democrats don't care about due process? I mean, again, and it's always Brett Kavanaugh. They should just make him the face of we don't care about due process. Like every time they say they don't care about due process, they should just flash his picture.
All right, what about Biden?